So now we're going to talk about methods of design. So we want our designs to be functional. So we talked about stacking functions. Functional design is design that you actually stack the functions. So a certain place could have multiple functions, or there are multiple aspects or functionalities to that one thing, right? So for instance, like the ladder, this Wallapini example uses the path of the sun to set up. Then it uses the angle of the sun on winter solstice to be 90 degrees to set up the roof. And then, it uses the warming or cooling aspect of the thermal constant of the earth, which is like 52 to 54 degrees. And they're using all these different aspects to stack it and create this super microclimate. And then the prior idea is that, let's say you've got a shed, and it doubles as a guest house, it doubles as, or a guest room, it doubles as an office, it doubles as a classroom, it doubles as, it has multiple functions in one space. So it could be one tool that you use multiple ways, or it could be a tool with multiple things attached to it, or multiple aspects to it, or a place or a thing, all that. It's a very versatile concept, but we want to design in such a way that our tools that way, we act that way, we interact that way. We want it to be functional. All right, cool. And then analysis. This is a super fun one. You want to understand all the different aspects of each element in your system, especially the super active elements like animals. You're going to want to think it through before you bring that element onto your system. A lot of people don't think about goats, and they have goats come on and they clear the property, and they're amazing the first couple of years, and then they love their goats, and now they don't have enough feed for the goats, and so the goats end up in a pen in a corner, and they're constantly just bringing them feed. And that might not serve the people. That might, the diet for the goats was great. It was all forage and so diverse, but now they're just on chaffy hay and sometimes some pannage from the system. If we understood the function of a goat herd, or having a goat, you need more than one. They get lonely when you have only one. So if we understand the way these animals work and the way they operate, then we can think into the future of how we can use them, how we can work with them, and whether they'll serve us in the long term. And maybe the community owns a herd of goats, and they just move around through the community, constantly keeping certain areas down and clearing certain areas for other people and helping out, but not being an overburden on anyone's particular property. So right here, I've got a salad and cow herd analysis, and so we've got the variety, the products, the needs, the behaviors. When we think about all those things, it really tells us not just the products of what we get out of it, but what they need and what they're going to be doing, the behaviors, and then the variety really determines each of those bandwidths in a lot of ways. So, as you go through with each different variety, you'll see all the different possibilities for management, for products, and for the needs, and as it relates to your property and bioregion. So analysis is super great, especially for seeing how things interact, like between the cow herd, the chickens, and the land, and the space, and the winter and summer. All those things, you got to plan out. And then observation and reflection. So, as always, we want to have this feedback loop with ourselves, where we're letting the information come in, and we're letting it develop, and we're letting our minds turn it over and ask questions, and thinking about the possibilities, and really allowing ideas to develop and adaptation to occur. It's really critical. All right, now options and decisions. With everything in life, you have options. And then within those options, there are certain decisions that we get to make today, tomorrow, some point in our life. There are always these decisions that we have to make. You know, with people, you know, it's like your living will and testament, and you know, maybe it's life insurance. You know, you're thinking ahead. Maybe it's the person you marry. All these options and decisions we have in our lives. But it's the same thing with our property. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with owning animals. It's like, well, how will you deal with this animal at the end of its life, and how will you, you know, all these aspects and variables exist, and if we don't consider them, they can sometimes surprise us. Just like with that goat example, right? Or bunny rabbits. You know, if you don't separate the male from the female, you will have a lot of bunnies very quickly. And if you haven't thought about that, you suddenly could have a problem where you're buying feed for all these bunnies, you're in an apartment, suddenly you've got all these bunnies everywhere and you don't know what to do. And yes, you got a lot of great manure, but oh my word, I only have a balcony and now I've got just tons of manure on the balcony, and it's the best garden ever, but I've got bunnies eating everything out of it. And I had a bunny fall yesterday and fall into someone else's garden, and you know, you've got decisions to make, clearly. So we got to think ahead so that we're not surprised. Now, the data overlay. This is another super classic, perhaps one of the most classic ways that we do things in permaculture. And it is putting that map down, and it is putting those contours, those identifying, you know, those words, identifying what markers are, making that legend, that key to identify things, putting down your trees, putting down the different zones, all this stuff on that map, making those layers, the path of water, all of it, the path of the wind, the sun path. That's data overlay, because you can lift, and all those layers, they overlay each other. So you can do it with transparencies, or you can skip the plastic and you just do it on your screen on the computer, and then you can see all the different iterations as much as you want, and go down to that lower level and change things and go back up and say, oh, well, now I can do this. And it's really powerful. Now, random assembly. This seems kind of random. It doesn't seem very powerful. But when we start playing with the different elements of our system, and we have just random interaction words between them, like on top of, next to, within, we can just start randomly doing things and then thinking about it. And, you know, suddenly ideas that occur to you, like compost heap inside of, you know, the goat yard or the chicken yard. And you're like, well, what would that look like? And then you're like, wait a second. That's what deep mulching is. You know, the deep bed mulching is for the winter that Salatin's doing. They combined those two things. And then the storage area for the hay got combined with the feeding area for the cows. And they got a trough that they lift up as the floor fills up with mulch over the season. And they can lift it up and then take the bales of straw off from on top of the stack of straw, and then lower it back down. And that way it's never at their foot level. They can never step in the trough. It's always just at the perfect height. So when we do this random assembly, don't think that good things can't come from it. Understand that many of these ideas that randomly you can come up with, people have randomly already come up with them in their own iteration. And they might be very elegant, even though they sound very awkward. Like maybe a pond on top of the rabbit house. And you're like, that doesn't work. But maybe someone will make it work and it will be amazing. Or the rabbit house on top of the pond, and suddenly the rabbit manure is feeding the fish. And, you know, things can happen. And then flow diagrams. If you've got a work area, a workspace, manufacturing, tour guides, you know, maybe you have a site tour layout through your food forest. It all depends on what you're after, but flow diagrams really can help you understand how it will go and how the experience will feel. So they're really powerful. And then zonal planning. This is a classic permaculture planning method. And this is, you know, it goes right along with data overlay. Everyone sees and has a layer where there's zonal mapping. And this is where, you know, that golden rule comes in with start with zones 1 and 0 and work out from there. Zone 0, some people say it's the inner zone. It's what we are and feel inside. but most people are saying zone 0 is the house, the home, interior, the permaculture scape. And then zone 1 is the area immediately outside the home, and then just beyond that is zone 2. And all the way to zone 5 where it's wilderness and we don't really do much in there. We're foraging, we're hunting, we're doing silviculture, we're doing fire management, prescriptive burns, all these kind of things. All of it has to do with the landscaping concept. The zonal planning is not like a permaculture invention. It's actually a landscaping concept that's just been applied. And it's about doing less work. If you've got something where you're working constantly every day on it, well, you're going to want it close to your zone 1 and 0. And that's why it's easiest to start with that, because you're already doing it every day. So just do it close to home. It's a project. It's easy to work on. Maybe it's inside the home. Maybe they're chicks you're raising and then you're taking out, And so in zone 1, maybe it's your kitchen garden. And so, we're starting out from there. Zone 2, maybe that's your sensitive orchard. Maybe that's your larger gardens. Maybe zone 3 is your main garden, your large, your field, your meadows, where you're sowing things in a broad acre sense. And then you've got your food forests, you've got your main orchard, your more resilient trees, your nut trees. And then your zone 4, it's the nut trees, it's the timber trees, ectomycorrhizal associations, right? The more tough trees, the more wild system, the taller canopies, we're moving further out, there's less open spaces for those big main gardens. Then zone 5, we're into wilderness. So the zones really help us understand that, but it's not like this anodiation, this nesting of zones. You might have your home on an area where around it's just all rock and it's not a place to grow, and it's just a place where you're collecting water to send to the area where you'll grow. We all live in diverse places, and we have the site we have, and we need to adapt and work with what we have. We can't necessarily just build a new home or, do something wild and do things that don't make sense. We have to obey the landscape and listen to the landscape and follow what it says. So the zones will too. And they will adapt and become funky. It won't be these concentric anything. It's going to be all over the map. And you'll find there's some overlap between the zones too, and you can connect them and all this sorts of things. Now, energy flow. This is going to influence how you do and where you put things. Where is the sun? How intense is it? Is there fire pressure? Is there seasonal cyclical things like flooding and fire? Is there like precipitation in a certain pattern, certain times of year? Where's the wind coming from? How intense is it? All these energies are going to influence how we design. The orientation of the house. This is the sun path. So we're going to orient so that the house is evenly facing the sun, takes that energy in evenly, so that one side of the house isn't overly hot or overly cool, so that you have clearly a home that it is taking the energy in, taking the light in. Otherwise, it can sometimes be harder to heat or cool the home if it's uneven like that. And it can create some irritation of sorts too. So how to calculate slope. This is another thing, knowing how steep everything is. Because if it's too steep, above 50% grade, then it's just wilderness. You don't want to do anything really with that unless you can get in there and bench from an easier slope, and then you might be able to work with that on a terrace or bench situation. But very rarely 50% is so steep. But yeah, for cultivation, for building swales, for all these kinds of things, we're looking at the much lower slope kind of thing, and then terraces at 30 to 40 percent slope typically, 20 to 40% slope typically. There's a lot of guidelines on all this stuff. An excellent guideline on all this stuff is Brad Lancaster's Earthworks volume. His volume 2 is rainwater catchment. Has stuff in there like the width of terraces in relation to how far the distance between them and their height and the slope. All those things working together are really critical if you're working with serious slope. If you don't have huge slopes that you're trying to work with, that you're trying to shore up and create serious earthworks, and in that case you're going to be working with people who are probably professionals anyway. If you want to do something aggressive like that and really, next level for a certain area that is difficult, you're going to be bringing in people anyway who do this regularly, who work with slope, who are professionals, and they're going to know your area, they're going to know your soil, and they're going to know the angles and all that and the distances that will work. But that being said, again, there are books and there are tons of resources online, NRCS and public resources of all sorts. So the rise over the run, rise divided by run, times 100 gives you the slope percentage, and that will really give you an idea of what you're working with. And there's a diagram right there of how you can do it. And then the aspect, so that's like the slope and the sun path combined. And so you're facing the sun. The aspect could be facing other things other than the sun, but we're talking about aspect to the sun right here. And so it combines these two different things. So if you're matching the sun path, you actually get way more light. If you're off the sun path and the light's bouncing off versus just being absorbed, where it's really a huge difference in the amount of energy going into that ground, energy going into because I mean the tree's getting hit multiple times. Like it's the energy behind it is reflecting a little bit on the back of that tree. You've got the energy being stored behind it in the soil. The energy will be coming back out, and maybe there's evapotranspiration happening from those trees, and so that water's coming up and collecting on those branches, which is condensation, which is a warming effect. There might be all these different things that are happening in situ, and that the aspect is influencing. And then sun angle. So we have the sun path, but during the course of the year, and we talked about this, the sun angle changes. So the sun is really high in the sky during summer everywhere, and then lower in the sky. And it depends on where you are in the world, how low. In the cold temperate, it's pretty low in the sky. But in the tropics, it only goes a little low and it kind of wobbles in the sky. And that's why their seasons don't have this huge swing. And yes, there's wet, dry tropics, there's wet tropics, all this stuff. But it's that wobble. It's not this huge swing. And that's why it doesn't go cold in the tropics like it goes cold in the temperate. They're just getting less light. You go all the way to the extreme in the Arctic, they're getting darkness for 30 days. That's why they get, the sun for 30 days straight in summer, and that's why they can, or 5 weeks, and that's why they can grow a giant food, because it's like the grow lights, inside their indoor system never go off. And the plants that adapt to that constant light and are okay with it just grow like there's no tomorrow. And it's sunlight, and it's not like an indoor system. It's in soil, it's outside, so it's everything ideal all at once, and it just grows so well. Side note, if you're growing indoors with lights and everything, you're going to want to use wind. You're going to want to imitate the cycle of the day. You want to give it darkness. Just because you can give it light all the time doesn't mean that plants don't need to transpire and rest and do other processes in the dark. They do. And you'll notice this if you start your starts with the light on always until they sprout. But then after they've grown a bit, put it on so there's 4 or 8 hours of darkness, and you'll see they'll grow much faster. So, and it depends on the plant, really. Some plants are okay with sun all the time, some plants are not, and it really depends on your situation, maybe even the cultivar or variety. So the sun angle changes throughout the year. The length of daylight also changes. That's what I was kind of getting at. Your length of daylight, like I could be growing Peruvian corn in my indoor garden, and I could be lowering the light to match exactly what it needs, so that we end up creating the kind of light climate that it was used to where it was born. So I could do less than 12 hours of light, less than 10 hours of light, and so the corn would think it's back in South America with their light patterns.